The gym buzzed with anticipation as people gathered for the open sparring session, the air thick with sweat, heat, and the sharp scent of old leather and worn-out mats. Fighters of all levels mingled, some showing off, some stretching quietly, others eyeing the crowd for potential challengers. Among them was a man known more for his arrogance than his skill. He strutted across the mat with the easy confidence of someone who had never been tested beyond his comfort zone, muscles rippling under his tight shirt, jaw set in a constant smirk. He welcomed attention, fed off of it, and today was no different. Then she walked in. Short, lean, and quiet, she moved with the calm grace of someone who had nothing to prove but knew something others didn't. She wore simple black workout clothes, hair tied back tightly, hands wrapped with care. A few heads turned, but not many. There was no fanfare, no grand entrance, just a woman stepping into a space that wasn't exactly welcoming. Most eyes flicked over her and moved on, assuming she was there to watch, maybe hold pads, maybe take a cardio kickboxing class. But then she raised her hand when the call for volunteers went out. At first, there was confusion. Some chuckled under their breath. A few whispered. She kept her eyes forward, expression flat, giving no one the satisfaction of a reaction. The fighter saw her from across the mat and grinned, wide and toothy. He gave an exaggerated shrug, mouthing something to his friends nearby. "This'll be quick." They laughed. It was all very familiar, the spectacle of ego, the underestimation, the assumption that power always comes with size and volume. He stepped forward, towering over her, throwing playful jabs in the air, clowning for the crowd. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. The coach gave the nod. Gloves touched his with a careless tap, hers with respect, and they took their positions. The bell rang. For the first few seconds, he danced around her, showboating, throwing lazy feints and keeping his distance. She didn't chase, didn't move unless she had to. Eyes locked on him, measuring, reading, absorbing. The room had gone from chuckles to a kind of amused anticipation. No one thought she'd land a hit, but everyone was curious what she'd do. They expected flailing, overreaching, a clumsy attempt at intimidation that would be her undoing. Instead, she waited, balanced, still, breathing steady, low in her stance, loose but ready. He finally came in, not hard, not serious. A jab meant more to provoke than to connect. She leaned just enough to let it pass, her foot sliding half an inch for a better angle. He followed with a hooks, loppy, wide, cocky. That was the opening she needed. In that tiny space between his overcommitment and his return to stance, she exploded forward. A flash of movement. One step, twist, shift of weight. Her elbow found his chin with surgical precision. There was no build-up, no dramatic wind-up, no slow-motion arc of fists flying through the air. It was clinical, efficient, devastating. His eyes rolled back before he hit the ground. The thud echoed in the space like a dropped barbell, loud and final. He didn't get up, not right away. The coach dropped to one knee beside him. A few people gasped. Others simply stood frozen, mouths slightly open, unable to process what they'd just seen. The woman stepped back to her corner, calm, breathing as if nothing had happened. Gloves still up, eyes steady. No celebration, no trash talk, no need. She didn't look at him again, didn't look at the crowd. She just removed her gloves slowly, placing them by the edge of the mat, then sat on the bench and reached for her water bottle. Silence lingered around her like armor. Laughter rolled through the gym like a wave the moment she stepped toward the center. Not a loud, joyful kind, but the kind that slips out when people think they are in on a joke, when they're convinced what they're seeing couldn't possibly be serious. Some of it came from the bleachers, where spectators lounged with protein shakes and phones ready to film. Some of it came from the fighters, gloves half on, whispering to each other with knowing smirks. The sound wasn't cruel outright, but it carried something worse, condescension masked as amusement. She didn't look like anyone's idea of a threat. Barely over 5 feet, slim with wiry arms, no flash to her gear, no big, name gym logo on her shirt. Her stance was casual but sure. She didn't scan the crowd or wave to the cameras. She stepped onto the mat like she'd been there before and knew exactly where her feet belonged. But nobody was watching her like they would a real competitor. They were watching her like she'd wandered into the wrong room and was about to get gently escorted out by a dose of reality. He leaned against the ropes, grinning as he watched her approach, arms folded across his chest. There was an amused glint in his eyes, a smug curl to his lip that said he didn't believe she would actually go through with it. She looked up at him and said nothing, just nodded once when the coach motioned them forward. Still, the crowd murmured, unsure whether they were watching a stunt or a mistake. Someone whispered, "She's gonna get folded in 10 seconds," and chuckles followed. Another added, "She probably thinks she's doing a demo or something." There was a nervous kind of energy in the air. People wanted entertainment, not a massacre, but they assumed the ending was already written. This wasn't supposed to be a challenge. This was supposed to be a moment everyone would talk about for its absurdity, a tiny blip of misplaced confidence that ended with a tap out or a towel thrown in mercy. She stepped into the ring. A few gasps escaped, mostly from the women in the crowd, who understood the stakes better than the rest. They knew what it meant to volunteer in a space that treated you like a side note. Her presence alone had already written a different kind of story, one most didn't want to read. But even as the laughter trickled into curiosity, the prevailing sentiment held firm. This was all just posturing, a warm-up at best, a novelty act at worst. The fighter bounced on his heels, showy and relaxed, slapping his gloves together with mock intensity. His friends lined the edge of the mat, phones pointed and recording. One of them muttered loud enough for others to hear, "This gonna go viral for the wrong reason." They laughed again, a little too eager to be part of something they thought would end in embarrassment. But she wasn't watching them, she wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on her opponent, her breathing controlled, the calm of someone who'd done this before. Maybe not in front of people, maybe not in this setting, but definitely somewhere, more times than they could guess. Someone rang the bell. The energy shifted slightly as the two circled each other. He still looked amused. Lou, slimmed and overly confident. She stayed grounded, low in her stance but not aggressive. Just present, watching, measuring. She didn't bounce, she didn't dance. Her body was still, her feet sure. The silence from the crowd stretched thin, as if everyone held their breath waiting for her to swing and miss or fall apart under pressure. But she didn't. She didn't flinch when he feinted, didn't bite on his playful jabs. The laughter died out slowly, replaced by a kind of reluctant curiosity. People leaned forward, a few stopped filming. No one said anything now, no jokes, no whispers, no predictions. There was an unease creeping in, the dawning realization that something about the setup had shifted in a way they couldn't explain yet. The woman who was supposed to fold or flail was still standing, still calm, still ready, and for the first time the fighter's smile faltered. Just a flicker, but enough for those watching closely to notice. She moved like water, like wind over still grass, silent, steady, without flash. Her body never tensed unnecessarily, never wasted motion. She wasn't looking for applause or attention. She was looking for rhythm, for breath, for the small gap between his pride and his stance. While he kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, trying to intimidate her with exaggerated shoulder rolls and showy pivots, she remained in a soft but firm guard, knees bent, shoulders relaxed, always watching. Her eyes never left him, not even for a second. Not when he tried to bait her with smirks, not when he let out little laughs through his mouth guard, not even when the crowd let out cheers as he boxed mid-ring, pretending she wasn't there at all. That was the difference. He performed, she studied. He was loud in his silence, calling attention to himself with every exaggerated move. She was quiet in her confidence, taking up space without needing to announce it. She didn't try to match his energy. She didn't flinch when his feet thudded heavy on the mat. Her breathing was soft and even. Her posture wasn't rigid but fluid, adaptable. She didn't move because he moved. She moved because it was time. He tried to read her, but there was nothing for him to read. Her expression gave nothing away. No trace of nervousness, no forced intimidation, just a cool detachment that bordered on surgical, the calm before something precise. His bravado started to shrink, not because she did anything flashy, but because she did nothing at all to affirm his assumptions. He expected wildness, overeagerness, swinging from the hip like someone desperate to prove she belonged. But instead, she measured him like a craftsman examines a flawed piece of wood, calm, deliberate, unimpressed. Every time he stepped toward her, she adjusted a fraction, not retreating, not advancing, just shifting. A quarter inch here, a pivot there. Eyes always forward, head slightly tilted, always watching. She didn't blink when he feinted high. She didn't bite when he shifted his weight for a fake takedown. There was no fear in her presence, and that confused him. Most people showed something: wide eyes, twitchy hands, uneven breath, some sign that they felt the moment pressing down, but she stood like she'd already seen this moment before and knew how it ended. Even the coach started watching her differently. At first, his gaze had skimmed past her like everyone else's. Now his arms were crossed, jaw tight, watching not just the fighter, but her, eerily watching. Noticing that her weight distribution was flawless, that her guard didn't drift, that her feet were exactly where they needed to be. This wasn't random, this wasn't luck, this was practiced, it was honed. She didn't move first, she waited, always waited, and in that patience she held control. The energy in the room changed because of that control, slowly at first, like someone turning a volume knob down. The people who had laughed were now silent, not just out of surprise, but out of something else, something closer to respect, even if they didn't have the words for it yet. They leaned in, they stopped cracking jokes. They started watching her the way people watch someone who knows a secret they haven't shared yet. And still, she didn't rush. Her steps were economical. Her balance was unshakable. The grace in her movements wasn't flashy. It was the kind that came from understanding every inch of her own body and how to use it efficiently. There was no wasted aggression, no unnecessary gestures, no panting or tension. Just rhythm, calm, precision. She adjusted her stance once, subtly shifting her rear foot a half-inch clockwise. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but the coach did. A few other fighters did too, the ones who understood what that kind of movement meant. That kind of detail didn't come from someone pretending. That kind of adjustment came from someone who trained deliberately, who had been under pressure before and knew how to breathe through it. And that's when the smirk vanished completely from his face. He wasn't in control anymore. He didn't know exactly when it had happened, but he felt it now. She hadn't thrown a single strike yet, but somehow he was already responding to her pace. She had taken the crowd from him, taken the narrative from him, taken the illusion of dominance and shattered it with stillness. He was loud, she was quiet, he was fast, she was ready. He tried to provoke her and she gave him nothing. It happened in a blink, too fast for most to fully grasp. One moment, they were circling each other, and the next, she closed the space between them like a whisper slipping through a crack in the door. No hesitation, no wind-up, no warning. Just the quiet flash of movement that came from hours, years, lifetimes of repetition. Her body shifted with a sudden precision that betrayed everything they had assumed about her. She didn't swing wildly, didn't throw a flurry of fists hoping one might land. She stepped in with control, her weight low, timing perfect, and as he began a half-hearted jab, maybe thinking she'd back off or flinch or get sloppy trying to respond, she moved right through it. Her right hand snapped up, not to punch, not to block, but to brush his jab off, course with the inside of her forearm. It was a parry so clean, it looked accidental to those who didn't understand. To those who did, it was the start of a very clear statement. In that same motion, her left foot pivoted slightly, angling her shoulder and closing the gap without rushing. She was too close now, inside his comfort, inside the space he thought was his. That's when she let her body do what it had been waiting to do. Her hips turned, her back leg planted. A single upward motion launched her elbow forward. not hard, not fast, but placed with terrifying accuracy. The sharp edge of her arm connected with the soft point just beneath his chin, and everything in him switched off like a light. There was no dramatic slow-motion fall, no wild stumble backward. His knees buckled and gave out beneath him instantly, like scaffolding knocked loose at the base. His upper body crumpled after, folding in on itself as his eyes rolled back and his head dropped forward. The sound of his body hitting the mat was sudden and final, like the crack of thunder right after lightning. 1 second he was towering above her, the next he was nothing more than a collapsed shape on the ground. Gasps cut through the silence like knives. No one laughed now. No one even breathed for a moment. The fighters who had joked minutes before stood frozen, mouths slightly open, expressions blank with disbelief. Someone dropped a phone. The coach stepped forward fast, kneeling beside the man, checking for signs. He was breathing, but still, out cold. Lights on, nobody home. His arms sprawled across the mat awkwardly, one glove twitching with residual muscle memory. She stepped back without urgency, letting her arms drop slowly to her sides. No flex, no shout, no celebration. Her face didn't change. Her chest rose and fell steadily as she walked toward her corner. Someone in the crowd finally exhaled, and it sounded like it had been held for minutes. Those who understood what they saw remained quiet. Those who didn't look to each other for confirmation, as if asking silently if this was real. No one had expected it, not because it was impossible, but because they had refused to believe it could happen. It was supposed to be a lesson in humility for her, a funny story, a moment of overconfidence corrected by hard truth. Instead, the moment belonged to her, not because of power, but because of precision. She hadn't thrown wild punches. She hadn't tried to overpower someone larger. She had waited, measured, and acted with cold discipline. It was over in one move, a single point of contact delivered at the perfect angle at the perfect time. There was no luck in it, no accident. It was mastery, quiet and exact. The fighter, who had been laughing minutes earlier, now lay silent, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. He would wake up soon, confused and embarrassed, the roar of the crowd replaced by ringing in his ears. He wouldn't remember the moment clearly, just the feeling of sudden impact and weightlessness as the mat rushed up to meet him. Around the gym, no one spoke. The energy had shifted completely, the narrative rewritten in seconds. What had started as a joke had turned into something else, something harder to mock and even harder to forget. The crowd, still recovering from the shock, couldn't look away. The silence came fast, swallowing the room like a tide rolling in without warning. It didn't creep in gently. It hit, sharp and heavy, the kind of silence that settles after something undeniable has happened. Every breath in the gym seemed to stall midair, caught between disbelief and awe. Where there had been noise, mockery, scattered jokes, and smug confidence just moments before, there was now stillness, tense and absolute. The fighter lay sprawled on the mat, unmoving except for the faint rise and fall of his chest, while the woman stood nearby, hands by her sides, calm as ever. No one rushed to fill the silence with applause. No one dared make a sound that might feel disrespectful to the moment. Even those who didn't understand exactly what they'd seen felt something shift, something permanent. A boundary had been crossed, not just in physical terms, but in the room's collective understanding. She had entered their space quietly, without challenge or show, and now stood in the middle of it as if she'd always belonged. The silence wasn't just shock, it was recognition. Some people blinked like they were waking from a dream, staring at the scene in front of them, as if trying to reframe it in real time. Phones that had been filming for laughs were now still in their owners' hands, screens glowing without purpose. Some lowered their devices slowly, unsure whether to keep recording or just watch the aftermath with their own eyes. No one wanted to be the first to break the silence. There was a weight to it, like something sacred had just happened. Not a miracle, but a revelation. The coach stood frozen at the edge of the mat, eyes not on the man who had fallen, but on the woman who had dropped him. There was no confusion in his expression, only realization. The kind that comes when something finally clicks into place, when you see skill where you'd been looking for novelty. His jaw shifted slightly, as if he was grinding thoughts together behind it, recalculating what he thought he knew. The woman didn't turn to the crowd. She didn't seek validation or expect applause. She just stood there, present, composed, and real. For the first time that day, all eyes were on her, not because they underestimated her, but because they now understood they had made a mistake. A big one, the kind that couldn't be taken back or laughed off. No one could pretend anymore that it had just been a lucky hit or a fluke. The strike had been too clean, too practiced, too perfect, and worse, she had done it without breaking a sweat. Even those who didn't train, who couldn't tell a jab from a cross or an armbar from a sweep, could sense the shift. The gym was a place built on ego, but in that moment, ego had been dismantled, crushed not by brute force, but by control. The kind of control that takes years to master, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself until it's time. It was a language spoken fluently and without apology. And though most hadn't spoken it themselves, they understood enough to know they'd just heard it loud and clear. Someone near the back of the crowd whispered something, but it didn't carry. Nobody laughed, nobody echoed it. The room had no space left for sarcasm, only awe and maybe a little bit of shame, the shame of having misjudged her, of having joined in the smirks and the dismissive glances, of assuming that quiet meant weak, that size meant threat, that confidence only looked one way, that silence wasn't a strategy, but a flaw. Fighters leaned forward now, not out of mockery but curiosity. Real curiosity, wanting to know where she trained, how long she'd been doing this, how many others she had surprised in similar fashion. They looked at her with new eyes, eyes that saw a threat not because she looked the part, but because she had earned it through clarity, timing, and something even rarer, stillness under pressure. The man on the mat groaned softly, his hand twitching as the coach called his name. He was waking up slowly, dazed. He would sit up soon and see the faces around him, realize what had happened. His memory might be foggy, but the echo of that strike would follow him longer than the bruise. He would know, even if no one said it out loud, that he'd been beaten by someone he had laughed at, and that the laughter had stopped not because it was rude, but because it had become impossible.